Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Professor Carinnes Alejandria, and I'm the Director of the Institute of Advanced Studies here at Loughborough University. Welcome to today's seminar. Welcome to those of you in the room in the International House. Welcome to our residential fellow, Dr. Maria Carinnes Alejandria. Very nice to have you with us. And welcome to those of you online. As always at the International House, we are going to have the most exciting conversation on a topic that is particularly dear to my heart, and that is resilience. We can spend days and hours talking about it, but this is something that is really important now, particularly in the context of urban communities. A couple of house rules, and then I'll introduce Carinnes. For those of you online, we will have time for questions and answers. Please post your questions in a Q&A thing you see on Zoom, and we will be monitoring that. For those of you in the room, please ask the questions, and there will be time also for discussion. After the seminar, the presentation is recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel. We are not, however, publishing the Q&A question session, just the presentation. And we will also release the presentation as a podcast in a couple of days' time. For those of you registered, you will receive the link to both YouTube video and the podcast. Now, let me introduce our residential fellow. We're absolutely delighted to have you here, Carinnes. I know it's been quite a journey, literally and metaphorically, to get to the UK, but it's absolutely wonderful to have you here. So Carinnes is an anthropologist specializing in disaster governance and health inequalities in Southeast Asia. She's originally from the Philippines, where she worked on the intersection of food security and flood vulnerability. And now she's based at Brunei, where she's mainly focusing on sociology and anthropology in the context of disasters and vulnerability. Also, just a kind of a side note, Carinnes has recently co-edited the most exciting special issue for Disaster Prevention and Management journal on creative methodologies. So if you haven't seen it yet, please check it out. It's absolutely fantastic. So thank you so much for all the work that you've been doing in disaster scholarship. And over to you, Carinnes.
All right. Thank you so much, Ksenia, for the generous introduction. And of course, thank you to the entire IAS staff for the warm welcome since I got here, 20 days now. Thank you so much. So I'd like to also take this opportunity to thank the institutions that supported this project, the University of Brunei Dar es Salaam and Sea Junction, for giving us the logistical support to conduct data collection for this project. Okay. Can I do this? Okay. Yeah. All right, so let me start my presentation with a discussion of my positionality as a researcher in disaster studies. I actually did not start as a disaster studies person. I was a medical anthropologist in training. And so I was focusing a study on, as a Filipino who was born, raised, and trained in the Philippines, I was studying this informal settlement in Metro Manila. It's the largest informal settlement there. And during that time, I was looking into food insecurity in an estuarial community. Now, while doing my ethnographic work there back in 2014, I came to a realization that majority of their experiences are entangled with flooding. So their lives are entangled with a constant flood that impact their communities. And so this was actually my introduction to the concept of disaster not being a natural event. So the reason why they're having flooding, as you can see in this picture, is that there are no drainage in this area, no other city services as well. And the reason for that is because of their status as informal settlers. So this picture is during Typhoon Vamco, if I'm not mistaken, 2019. Wherein my community partner sent me this photo. They are trying to dig a makeshift drainage in this area to relieve the compound. So on the side of this photo is the entire compound that is submerged in flood. So they're trying to release the water back to the estuary because no government support was there. So this is I'm seeing disaster in urban informal sectors or settlements as a form of a politics of neglect, wherein the government, the state would not be mindful of the conditions of these areas just because they are not, in some cases, documented residents of this area. The other photo, so come COVID-19 and the impact of pandemic in the Philippines, um, I went into another strand of disaster studies wherein I looked into civil, military, humanitarian coordination. So I've noted this photo that you're seeing is from the Armed Forces of the Philippines, which was just taken 2 months ago. So this is from my hometown that got immense rain and caused severe flooding in these areas. And so what I'm trying to say is that the my journey in disaster studies is rooted in the concept of justice. I noticed that from that the insecurities that most informal settlements have, urban communities have, are rooted in the injustices, various forms of injustices that they have been experiencing as unwanted members of society. And so this looks back into the discussions on the right to the city discussions and such. Okay, that works. So in this talk, I will be focusing on, I would like to introduce the new project that I have with my collaborators. And here I ask, and I want to nuance the concept of resilience in urban Southeast Asia, particularly during moments of overlapping hazards. Ksenia mentioned earlier that I co-edited in DPM, the Creative, Reflexive, Critical Methods in Disaster. While doing that, I was also co-editing another special issue, which is focused on disaster governance in Southeast Asia. So the reason for that is because we are noticing the overlapping hazards that Southeast Asia is experiencing. I focus mainly on COVID-19 plus flooding. And then, of course, at one point, I also worked into volcanic eruptions, hence the connection a bit to Monia's work. Volcanic eruptions, and then COVID. So we are comparing those types of compounded disasters at one point and their impacts and in the community and the responses of community. So for this particular presentation, I am focusing on 4 countries, and I'll discuss more about this sub-region in a while. And I'm looking into how this duality of crisis, flooding, and the COVID-19 lockdowns are impacting these communities, and how did these communities respond to this especially when governmental and other formal humanitarian actors are unable to respond. For example, this photo that you're seeing, very proud, it's a finalist. It was one of the finalists in the photo competition at Needs in 2023. This was taken by my childhood friend who was responding at that time. You see, even though this is my hometown, I was not able to come home at that time because the island was isolated in communication and transportation because of the impact of the super typhoon. And so you would see here local resilience in the sense that no formal humanitarian can enter this place. And so it was just the locals trying to make do of what they have and the resources that they have to somehow get themselves to support each other during this very difficult time. So the key questions I'm going to answer today, and this is from a myriad of multiple questions that we have for this project. But for this 45 minutes or so of lecture, I'm going to focus on these 3 questions. What are the roles of informal networks during these compounded disasters? And number 2, the gender disaster response and preparation. And number 3 would be I'd like to look into a little bit into the forms of community-based humanitarian action. So what is BIMP IAGA? So every time I go now to conferences, because I thought it was such a popular term, apparently not really. So I keep on defining this now in every single event that I go to. What is BIMP IAGA? Why BIMP IAGA? So BIMP IAGA is a consortium. It's an economic consortium consisted of Brunei Darussalam, Indonesia, BI Indonesia, M Malaysia, and P Philippines. But it doesn't cover the entirety of these countries. It only covers what you can see in this map. You would notice that it only covers parts of the entire Borneo is right there. So I live right there in a really, really small place right there. That's where I live right now in Brunei. So that's the entire Borneo, parts of the Sulawesi, and then parts of southern Philippines. My hometown is right there, Palawan. So geographically, I didn't run too far. So I'm still in that same region. And so why did they create this organization? This organization intended to bolster the economic development in these areas because they're being left behind by other parts of the countries. So but the thing is, the rapid urbanization that the economic development that they're hoping for is not the only challenge that they're experiencing. They're also experiencing issues with rapid urbanization, climate change, and uneven infrastructure that has left parts of these communities marginalized as well. So you can just imagine the double marginalization that people are experiencing in these areas. Now, the thing is that apart from these issues of urbanization, there is now threats of flooding. I'd like to highlight as well that the new capital of Indonesia is being moved to this part of the world. So from what? Malaysia's Kuala Lumpur. Jakarta, sorry, from Jakarta. Hi, Lena, sorry. My collaborator might be here. From Jakarta, it's now being moved to Borneo area, which is Kalimantan area right there. So they're going to have their capital there. But the question is it going to be a viable place? Because the reason why they're leaving Jakarta is because it's sinking and moving now to Borneo that's supposedly more stable. But then again, flooding now is impacting the entire island of Borneo. So with that, I'd like to highlight as well the ADB research that is like 10 years old now, highlighting the various threats and risks in the area. And it seems like this particular findings from 2015 remain true today as the sub-region grapples with issues of compounded disasters. Right now, apart from flooding and zoonotic diseases, this region is battling with heat, extreme heat. Now, speaking of research methods, owing to my training as an anthropologist, I've decided that my entire team should go into creative methodologies for this project. There are three modalities by which we gathered data for the project. We used the first one is that we use sociogram. So I developed this particular tool to look into vulnerabilities, preparedness, responses, and the actors. So it's actually a fun tool that we used, and community members found it initially difficult and then later on intriguing, because the moment you plot, and don't worry, moving too far, but this Thursday, I'll be doing a postgraduate workshop discussing about these methodologies. But what's so interesting about this is that once we are done plotting these things, and we ask the community members, how do you feel about the findings that we have? They would see that all of the actions were just post-disaster. There were no preparedness actions done. They were like, wait, there was no preparedness at all. So it also makes them realize beyond conversations, because sometimes when we just interview, people forget the point of conversations. But then there's the visual reflection that everything that happened were just post-disaster. And then they would see actors as well, because we have actors as part of this, and they would say, wow, it's just my family who helped me. And so the realizations come during this period. And so this particular tool was also inspired by a dear friend, Yvonne Su of York University, who implemented a version of her sociogram in the Philippines for disaster studies as well. We also did walking ethnography. So here is a picture of me taken by my research assistant when I was doing walking ethnography. So what we did there is to have the residents, the affected residents, to bring us to spaces where they remember things and materiality. So this is the edge of his house, their village, where he was saying, this is where the water came from, and this is where I knew that, something is going to happen to us. So we did walking ethnography, and we also did photo elicitation. Why did we do those two things? We did those two things in the hope of having a more localized mapping process, a community-based mapping process that for risk, hazards, and vulnerabilities, and of course, resilience. Now, for this particular presentation, I am only using about 100 interviews for this project that covers 4 countries. We are not going to discuss the photo elicitation data set or the walking ethnography data set. These are all just from the interviews. So what we use is MaxQDA to develop and code our theme. So just showing you that it went a bit complex at one point. We have like 2,000 coded segments running, and so this actually created a lot of anxiety for me. Which one should I discuss for this particular presentation? So we're not discussing 2,000 coded segments today, just some parts. Okay, so at this point, I'd like to present to you my collaborators. I'd like to bring them wherever I go. I know I cannot bring them physically because of logistics, but we are going to have a gathering in Brunei this September to have all of the collaborators come in, and that's thanks to C Junction who will fund that. So we're going to have that meeting and then discuss the directions of the project. But for this particular period, I'm going to present to you my collaborators. They will be discussing parts of discussions of their narratives of flooding. It's only going to be a minute per video, so please bear with us. Oh, the photo that you're seeing as well are the team members. So some of them are funny looking pictures. Some of them are action photos. Can't find the other photos. So, but these are the per country collaborator.
Picture play, can you click here, I think.
Click her. Sorry.
Hello, I am Shariza Shahrin from University Brunei Darussalam, and I want to provide a brief background on flooding in Brunei. Now, Brunei Darussalam is a small nation in Southeast Asia, and the country is divided into 4 administrative districts: Brunei Mora, Tutong, Temburong, and Balait. Persistent monsoon rainfall poses a significant challenge for Brunei, leading to widespread flooding that overwhelms drainage systems and causes flash floods. In September 2023, heavy rain flooded remote low-lying areas of the Tutong district, submerging roads under 1 to 1.3 meters of water, making them unreachable except by boat. This inundation affected approximately 85% of the area, impacting 56 houses and 300 residents. In late December of the same year, heavy rainfall caused flooding in the Balait district, disrupting operations at medical facilities and necessitating temporary closures for repairs. Similarly, parts of the Brunei Mora district experienced flash flooding on New Year's Eve, prompting warnings from the Brunei Darussalam Meteorological Department.
Okay. Sorry, Sharisa, I cut some of their points because it's running 2 minutes. So these are just 1-minute parts of their recorded discussion. So in the interest of time, these are some of the coded segments that we have on risk and vulnerability. But for the interest of time, I'm just focusing on probably 1 or 2 for every country. So here for Brunei, although Sharisa mentioned it's 2004, the flooding she was discussing was in 2004. The areas that we studied, for example, Tutong district and the capital area, Brunei Mora district, they have been experiencing flooding seasonally for the past decade. So during our interviews, flooding in terms of risk, during our interviews, there was a normalization of flooding among the participants, and this hindered them from preparing for events that were beyond the typical versions of flooding. This photo that you're seeing is from one of those seasonal floodings. It looks like just a swamp, but it's actually a human deep level. I don't know how to, but it's beyond a human height. And yes, there will be crocodiles there. So it's multi-layered of risk for flooding. And there will be a boat that will bring them from their house. So the point of view of the picture is that this is the house and the owner is taking a photo of it. So they have a boat to go to their car. And you would notice that the car is safe because the government what do you call this, raised the highways just so that humanitarian aid can come in. So you would see that this has been going on. So humanitarian aid can come in, and then community members can save their cars, and then they can still be mobile. Another vulnerability that I'd like to highlight is about the drainage system. In the four countries, Brunei has the most impressive drainage system, especially in the city center. However, in the peri-urban areas, such as Tutong district, the maintenance of this drainage is a bit wanting. So here you will see a drainage that is highly clogged with overgrowth and some other debris. And so one of the participants, so you'll see here some quotations from the participants, said that it's been a long time. It's been a long time since they were cleaned, maybe 2 to 3 years. That's why the floodwater takes longer to drain. And I asked this participant, have you considered cleaning this as a community? And the answer was no. The reason why is because it's the government's job. So it's a very interesting response to that question, which is totally different when you go to Indonesia. So I think this also reflects the culture per country and how they perceive risk and accountability towards lessening their risk. Let me move on now to Indonesia, and please. Here is Dr. Lena Hanifa, who is a human rights lawyer. So another point that's interesting about this project is that we're all women with different types of backgrounds. So Sharisa is like me. She's also an anthropologist, and Lena is a human rights lawyer and an educator as well. So this is the narrative.
Is Lena Hanifa from Universitas Lambung Mangkurat, Banjarmasin, Indonesia. I'm also a collaborator for research on disaster preparedness among urban communities in Brunei, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Philippines, or BIMT, with Dr. Maria Carinnes Alejandria from University Brunei Darussalam. Before I begin, I would like to show you some pictures on what happened in Banjarmasin in January 2021. While at the same time, COVID-19 also happened. At that time, Banjarmasin experienced the longest flood. Many urban neighborhoods were immersed underwater for weeks. The first picture, you can see that, showing children playing in the water while vehicles passing by, and how the areas in Banjarmasin were affected by flood. Banjarmasin is known as the oldest city in Kalimantan and famous as Kota Seribu Sungai, or a city of thousand rivers. The city faces many challenges, from floods during the rainy season to fire disaster during the dry season. The biggest challenge, of course, will be the threat of sinking. Banjarmasin is 0.16 meters below the sea level.
Interestingly, Banjarmasin will be sinking faster than Jakarta. So this city has moved its capital from Banjarmasin to another city, which is Banjarbaru. So there is a phenomenon of shifting capitals in this region because of the impact of climate change. Anyway, as Dr. Lena mentioned, Banjarmasin is known as the city of 1,000 rivers. There are so many rivers in this city when I got there. And most of the rivers are either polluted or clogged or built on houses. What you're seeing right now are several of the photos I took in that area. You see the rapid urbanization increased informal settlements in the river area. They just keep on extending. And when I had a discussion with government officials, they mentioned the cultural value of staying in the river that they cannot tamper with, or else the community will be against them. So one of the statements here says, our house is right behind, close to the riverbank, so it gets flooded easily. Another issue that I noticed there, which was also reported by the participants, is that of their double exposure to risk for health hazards. What you're seeing on the other photo is what we call as a jamban apung, which is a floating toilet. So during periods of flooding, of course, the sewage gets to the living spaces because, as you would notice, this toilet doesn't have proper sewage system as well. So this causes a lot of diseases as well for some of the participants. And so the flood impacts, there's so many interplay between flood and health and other risks in this area. Now let me move on to Malaysia with Dr. Zai. Dr. Zai is a transport economist.
Preparedness in BIM-eager countries. I'm representing Sarawak, Malaysia. The Sarawak state is one of the largest state in Malaysia, and it represents, the state itself represents a significant disaster impact, which is flood. In 2024, Sarawak experienced significant flooding impacting many areas across the state. The causes of the flooding were heavy rainfall, which is an unusually intense monsoon season, which brought heavy and prolonged rainfall, overwhelming rivers, and also the drainage system. The flood in 2024 caused extensive damage to homes, infrastructures, and crops. Many communities were evacuated, with emergency services and relief agencies working around the clock to provide shelter, food, and medical assistance. The flooding also disrupted transportation and communication network, complicating rescue and relief efforts.
All right, so the picture you're seeing right here, it's a very strategic photo that we took just because our participants mentioned that during the 2021 flood, the water reached that road. And if you reach that road behind us, that meant the ground floor of the houses where we're standing have already been submerged. And so it's also strategic because the building behind us is the prayer room. It's like a surau, and so that became the evacuation center for most of the residents in this area, because the proper evacuation center would be about 2 to was it 5 kilometers, something like that, kilometers away. So the easiest place to go for evacuation will be the prayer area right there. So in Malaysia, one key vulnerability that they have, again, is that of normalization. Seasonal flooding happens. Even the government issued this calendar that you're seeing. So part of the project as well is that we're documenting materialities of disaster, which will come out as a different paper. But anyway, so this is one of those responses of the government issuing calendars that will have not just the prayer time, but also the rise in water, so that people will be mindful of high tides, because once it's high tide, then some parts of this area in Sarawak get submerged. Now, why is that photo there? Because I saw that when I was doing walking ethnography, and then I told the community partner, I told him like, oh, so you do have flood warning here, because they're highly dependent on WhatsApp. So they communicate through WhatsApp to give each other feedback on the rise of water and such. And then he said that it's the first time he saw it. And then when I asked a local government, when has this flood device when was it installed? And they said several years ago. So what does that tell us? It tells us that there's a disconnect between government action and community preparedness for flooding events. And so I asked him, have you ever heard that work, or did you ever check that? And he said, no, I just rely on the message of my neighbor who looks into the river, the one that you saw earlier, and tells me like, okay, the water is now up, we have to evacuate. So there are disconnects in the form of preparedness for these communities. Okay, so now we're in the Philippines. sorry, 4 countries. I'm taking time.
Good day.
Okay.
I'm Dr. Luena Fernandez, and with me, Dr. Luisa Wigakot, and we are from Palawan State University.
Palawan was among the regions strongly hit by the super typhoon Odette in the afternoon of December 17, 2021, with maximum sustained winds of 150 kilometers per hour near the center and gustiness of up to 205 kilometers per hour over the coastal waters of Palawan. The super typhoon destroyed the province's capital and northern municipalities, causing catastrophic devastation to both life and property. Barangay Langogan was one of the areas in Puerto Princesa City that had been strongly hit by the typhoon Odette. The strong winds and heavy rains caused the Langogan River to overflow, resulting in a significant flooding and landslides that damaged main roads and bridges, cutting off-road access between Puerto Princesa City and the northern Palawan.
During that time, the Palawan Provincial Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Office estimated 70 to 80% damage to the public and private infrastructures. Also, most communities experienced disrupted communication and power outages, making post-disaster response more difficult for the residents, government institutions, and humanitarian organizations.
So, Palawan is my hometown, and I grew up being told by everybody that it's the last frontier of the Philippines. It's a well-known tourist destination. I grew up without storms whatsoever, but recently, and of course, climate change, we have been having some storms or hurricanes. You call it hurricanes, I suppose, but storms, yes, typhoons for us. So anyway, this is during the COVID-19, specifically during the peak of it in this place, they were impacted by a super typhoon that has never been seen ever in this part of the country. And so there's no preparation. The speaking with locals, even government officials, they would say that we only prepared for 3,000 because it's just like to check a KPI because we never get typhoons here. But then they got hit, and then 25 or so thousand people were displaced by this typhoon. And as a person delivering humanitarian support, I wasn't even able to come home and deliver support here. Communication was down, everything was down. So as I've mentioned, they were left to their own. So because of this micro typhoons coming into the country, people were thinking when the announcement came on that there will not be a major typhoon. It's just one of those rainy period. So they were caught off guard in terms of preparation for this typhoon. But I'd like to highlight the response that one of the participants had. So the difficulty that she experienced was that she was not able to access aid during this period. And because of the issue of COVID as well, the evacuation centers was so full, they were not accommodated. Plus the point that they were informal settlers, they were not allowed to, they were not prioritized because those who were prioritized are those that have proof that they are residents of that area. Without access to aid, without access to evacuation center, they were forced to find ways where to live. They actually lived in this truck for 9 months post-disaster without toilet, without anything, just on this truck that a good friend of them lent them for a while. And because of this, all of this stress and issues, she even had a stroke, which impacted her life up until today. Up until today, no support. When I did a follow-up interview with her, the maximum that she got in all of this would be about 10,000 pesos. I don't know how to translate in UK money, but 10,000 pesos. So what I'm trying to highlight here is that flooding plus COVID created some much more risk for, especially for vulnerable population like what you're seeing right now. So let us move on then to this comparison of risk and vulnerabilities. For the past 30 minutes, I was just speaking with you about how these communities are at risk, made at risk, and are vulnerable to various hazards. You see, this is a country comparison of this risk and vulnerabilities, which is so interesting. I really thought, photo elicitation is such a great tool. These are pictures, by the way, from the participants. one of them sent me this photo, which looks so, so calm and relaxing. It's just ducks on a supposedly river, but it's not the river. That's his front yard with the crocodiles and the ducks, and all snakes, everything right there. And that's his home right there. That is gets to be submerged with flood, and you would notice that it has been normalized. Why? Because they have boats now, to make sure that they are able to move from their house to go back to their work while their house is flooded. So the risk, the normalization of risk in these areas is contributing to their suffering during periods of disaster, and of course, that gets to be perpetuated in various contexts. Now let me move into the one that I was supposed to be targeting, the role of informal networks. I was battling with myself whether I should discuss much about the risk before I jump into this, but the responses would only make sense once we discuss the risks that are associated with risks and vulnerabilities associated with this. The two photos you're seeing are versions of responses on to flooding that we've documented. So these are the informal networks that are present in the interviews that we had. We had, most of the time, it's the family, the kin-based network that serves as a support group for mitigating the impacts of flooding. Neighbors as well became a prominent source of support for them. The one that I'm pointing at, so that's me. So I'm pointing at what you call as a ban, B-A-N. I was told that this is coming from a cultural practice of rice farming in Brunei. And somehow they've decided that this is a good community response to block the flood water that's coming into their area. So they recreated bonds, the border. If you're aware of how agrarian places would work, the farming areas are enclosed in raised ground. So that's what they tried to do here. So it's a community approach that was led by the barangay, or I'm sorry, the village heads, the katuas, to create some kind of a flood barrier. The other photo you're seeing is from one of the participants, and yes, there's an emoji right there because he posted this in his Facebook and then told me like, here, you should have it too. So anyway, this photo shows him saving his neighbors using the boat that a personal boat that they have. And so during this period, not any of the government offices were able to come to their area to provide rescue operations. So these are just some of the samples where informal networks were the ones responding for flooding and or responding to preparing each other for flooding events. In a moment, I'm gonna go discuss religious institutions and women's group. The religious institution is something that I wasn't prepared to see from our data set. But anyway, gender dimension of disaster response and preparation. So I had some preconceived bias going to the field just because the places that I'm going to study were highly Islam practicing countries. And in these countries, typically women have prescribed roles. And so when I went and had discussions with them, I was expecting that expecting that I would be seeing data that would say my role was based only on caregiving and such things. But I was surprised to meet, for example, Ibu Agusiliana, the photo in the center. She's a well-decorated, well-awarded climate worker in Indonesia, in Banjarmasin per se. Those trophies you're seeing are awards given to her for creating sustainable climate adaptation mechanisms for the community. And so it's so amazing to see this. And I could discuss more about this because I'm just so amazed with how this thing is working. And the other photo you're seeing right here is another woman who channeled support from the Catholic Church to build an entire village of relocation area, just because they don't have any place to return to because the typhoon wiped out the entire place. And so it's called the Caritas Village in the Philippines. And obviously, this is also through the help of Caritas, the humanitarian organization. But then again, I'd like to emphasize the quiet burden that women face during disaster periods, wherein my participant right there was showing me how the layers of burden that she carried during disaster period. This is in Brunei, wherein she was showing me the river that has gazillion of crocodiles in it. She's saying that this area overflows, and then I have to make sure that the chickens that they're taking care of will not be eaten by the crocodiles. All the animals they take care of will be safe, and the children as well, and prepare. So all of those silent requirements are allocated to her. And she does that on top of making sure that post-disaster, she's also going to be the one to clean up the space and everything. So here is probably my attempt to say that women's role during disaster preparedness and, of course, response is far beyond romantic. Although we see these leaders thrive, they were also they're not just leading, they were also given the role of caregiving. So it's a multiple roles that they have to perform as women in their society during this period. So what are the forms of community-based humanitarian action that we documented from this year-long data collection? Here are some of it, but for the interest of time, I have about 5 minutes with you. I would like to highlight the interfaith movement in Indonesia. I was so surprised to have had this discussion with this family. This family has been leading an interfaith group in Banjarmasin in Indonesia to create resiliency and climate adaptation in communities that are highly vulnerable to flooding and other types of hazards. And so from livelihood opportunities to ensure food security to policy discussions with government, this family is at the center of this interfaith group. So, which brings me to the point that one of the things that I'm really looking forward to for the next part of this project is to look into faith-based organizations and how they are how they're placed in this response and preparation mechanisms in vulnerable areas. So what's next? As I've mentioned, so as I've mentioned, I am just on year 1 of the project implementation. So there's another year of me going to these countries and doing field work. And so the year 2 plan, apart from releasing the papers from year 1, for the year 2 data collection, these are the points of inquiry that we would like to take as a team. We'd like to look into civil, military, humanitarian coordination. I'd like to emphasize that the countries we're covering, the areas we're covering, are also highly securitized areas. So there's conflict sometimes between the state and with the impacted communities. I have to emphasize, except for Brunei, the 3 countries that are included here, we are working with urban informal settlers. So there's constant conflict in that. So we are going to look into that, how responses are securitized, how civil military are coordinating support. I mentioned already the faith-based component. I'd really love to look into this. This is also another point of research that is going on in humanitarian studies circle. How are faith-based acting as humanitarian actors? Of course, the one that I mentioned earlier, the gendered response, the gendered burden rather, in disaster response. I'd like to look into that. And the one that was not in plan at all was the crocodiles. So that being said, I remember walking to one of the flooded areas, and I think I've mentioned this to some of you, and doing the walking ethnography, and I saw this car submerged in water, and I was thinking, wow, what a great thing to take a photo and then write about. And then my community partner said, oh, doctor, you have to move out. There's a crocodile right there. So these are the things that are normal to them, but this is part of the hazard scape that they have, so risk scape that they have. So I'm I'm very interested now to look into the anthropogenic wildlife interaction during periods of disaster, just because of the context that the encroachment that the government says the urban informal settlers go encroaching in wildlife areas is also creating further risk and hazards to community members. So why do this? Towards what? So towards three main agenda. We are hoping to have institution community interfaces. All the time, there is a disconnect between community and informal structures and how they deal with hazards and risk and vulnerabilities. And so we would like to have to create a space and platform wherein the institutions and community could have discussions. And that's the goal of the September convening. We'll gather all the collaborators, government representatives, NGOs to have a discussion about what's going on with the BIM-Iaga region. And then for the second part is policy pathways. So as an engaged anthropologist, this is a requirement in my life. I want to make sure that this doesn't just go to a library. I want to make sure that community members would also I want to make sure that their sufferings are also alleviated through policy interventions. In which case, I'm hoping to have informal actors recognized in policies as partners of for actions, and of course, the intersection between urban informality and multi-hazard risk. The maps that I've been talking about, which I cannot do yet because we need to have more capacity towards that. We're hoping to have risk planning through the community-based mappings that we've been doing for the past years. And with that, I would like to conclude by recognizing the popular phrase that it takes a village to raise a kid, it takes a village to create this multi-country project. And so I am recognizing my collaborators, the community, the research assistants that we had in all of this 4 countries, and in 2 languages that operate in this in this part of the world. I'd like to say from all of us, terima kasih. Maraming salamat. Thank you for the opportunity to share a project with everyone.